The handouts are available to those of you who are viewing online by going to the right-hand side of your screen and going down to tonight's class and double-clicking where it says handouts, and you'll have those. The first page of the handouts basically gives what the classes will be. Now, tonight's class, since in our first round we actually failed to archive class number 1 on Aries, we're going to start with the beginning. However, the next 3 classes are archived online, so you can watch the next 3 classes via streaming video. Next week's class, which is February 9th, we will start up with the 5th class, which will be Leo, and then we're going to follow in zodiacal order till we reach the end of the class, which should be March 29th. There is a possibility I'll have one class after that to re-record class number 4 on Cancer, just so that we have a consistency of presenters. So, all right, this is attributed to King David. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. Amen, anyone?
Yeah.
All right. Now we're in church. Okay. So, what I'd like to start out in this class is discussing the fact that we live today in an era of technological advancement, which is that of material science. Now, material science basically only recognizes that which can be measured, either by the human senses or human senses as they are aided by instrumentation. And it's really difficult for us as a modern, postmodern urban people to comprehend the total dependence of early civilizations, as well as present-day tribal cultures on seasonal changes and the fact that humans, through the predominance of history, have pretty much lived in harmony with the natural world around them. Our ancestors lived at a time where the interrelationship of the spiritual and unseen forces with natural forces was an accepted fact. Spiritual technology was at a higher use in the past. Now we live in this era where material technology has advanced. Some of us try to use both.
Spiritual technology. You want to say more?
Well, I think of spiritual technology as being the awareness of the interrelationship of life with all other things, the influence of unseen or non-physical forces upon other life forms, human included, the ability to do a lot of the things that might be assigned to the term of occult sciences, whether it's things such as telepathy, spirit communion, astral projection, those type of things. The ability to extend consciousness into other planes of existence, to be able to use second sight, to see and diagnose ailments and prescribe remedies. I could go on, but I consider that to be spiritual technology.
So by technology, you're referring to systematic ways of knowingly doing that.
Yes.
Accessing the spiritual worlds. Organized, systematic.
Through systems.
Carrying on through traditions, etc.
Right, and even in tribal cultures today, ritual is one of the ways in which that is done. Good question, Laura. All right, the 4 seasons of the year are reflected in the milestones in human lives: birth, initiation, marriage, and death. So in this class, it's on the Decanates, we're going to be talking about this interrelationship of symbolism to these life milestones, to human character, and the language of symbols and feelings. This great birth, death, rebirth cycle was reflected in the continuous cycles of the starry firmament. The underlying idea of the holidays is to be in rhythmic cooperation with the forces of nature. We certainly have an advantage living here in New Mexico, being so close to tribal culture. If one gets out during the different seasons to attend the dances at the various pueblos, you get a sense of being in and around a people who truly have a sense of cooperative rhythm with that of the natural world. So here is the graph that I like to work with. And the reason I'm introducing this in a class on the Decanates is the fact is that when we study astrology, what we're trying to do is make sense of our lives. And all of our lives tend to follow in the same system or orders of things unless they're, cut short at an early age. So we go from birth to initiation. Initiation is very important. And it is something that is overlooked in many ways in post-industrial modern society. There are still some cultures. This is an image of a quinceañera, which is a coming-of-age ceremony. In Judaism, you have bar mitzvah or bat mitzvah. In Catholic tradition, you would have the sacrament of confirmation. There are different traditions where the individual moves from the state of childhood into that liminal state between childhood and adulthood. And that's what initiation does. Initiation brings the individual into the community. Marriage is when two persons come together to share their lives. Quite often, it has been for the goal of progeny, for reproduction. This is part of maintaining the race, keeping human beings on the planet. But there's a lot of other things. There is also an initiation that comes about when we enter into partnership with someone. I call it the polishing stone.
Boy, is it. Rub that thing.
Yeah. I didn't mean it that way, Laura.
Well, that's part of what keeps it getting shinier.
Okay. Yes, I was thinking more in terms of the grist that refines our character. Generally comes through.
Laura gets rid of that language and I can't do it. Where must Laura be these days?
That's why I came tonight.
And lastly, where we end up is in the process of death and remembrance. We live on either through our DNA, our children, grandchildren, that progeny, through our creative progeny. We either leave behind genes or what are called memes, units, cultural units that are left behind. And we live on in the memory of others. So all of this process of astrology is telling this story, this birth, from birth to the grave story that we go through. And, certainly once we get past 50, we start looking closer to the grave. So, rite, ritual, and religious holidays became a means to preserve tradition and folklore, and to integrate the higher powers and rhythms of nature into daily life. Astrology had its birthplace in these prehistoric times, when through observation, humanity sought to explain events here on Earth to their correspondences in the starry night sky. In all cultures, astrology, or calendar computation, was important for the timing of religious and agricultural purposes. Now, the Egyptian solar calendar was developed 4,236 years before the Christian era. The Egyptian contributions to the measurement of time included 12 daylight and 12 night hours, 12 equal months of 30 days, a week of 10 days with 5 or 6 epigomenal days added at the end of their year.
Epigomenal?
Yeah, they're the extra days.
Okay.
They're the ones that, they're the extra days that don't really fit in anywhere else, so you have a little cluster.
So did they have any meaning? I mean, were there special things that happened, or do you know?
I don't know, but in most cultures, those days,
Were they days of rest?
they were, holidays, or they
Or
were
else anything goes.
that anything goes. It was much like to the Romans, the Saturnalia, where during that period of time, anything goes. You know, there was, society was sort of turned on its ear.
Okay.
Now, astrology is a blend of a calendar system, a method of preserving primeval truths in the form of symbolism, mythology, and folklore. And that's what we're going to be studying. Astrology is a system for understanding the spiritual and psychological makeup of the individual and his or her relationship to the greater scheme of things. The relationship of astrology to personality characteristics was born from this long involved process of observation. The year was first divided into 4 seasons. Think again: birth, initiation, marriage, death. It was observed that, and then into 12 subdivisions, it was observed that individuals born during each of these 12 segments of the year express specific character traits, which we know of as the signs. And to represent their most obvious personality traits, animal symbols were chosen based on corresponding characteristics: ram, bull, etc. These symbols varied in Chinese, Aztec, Mayan, according to cultural symbols available within their particular environment. Why do you think we have ram, bull? Any thoughts?
They were animals in that culture.
And that culture was Near Eastern. This was Mesopotamian culture. And it was actually that part of the world where the first domestication of animals took place. Of course, dog is, I'm surprised that there isn't a dog in the Zodiac. There is among the Decanates, but the dog was the first domesticated animal. And then cows, sheep, horses came later, but around only 10,000 years ago that we know of. So this is fairly recent, and it is those animals that were basically exported to the rest of the world. Yeah.
Can I ask a question more about the previous sentence? Why do you think it is that the 12 month per year cycle predominated when the moon really has a pretty reliable 28-day cycle, and it would have been 13 months to the year?
Well, I think because there is a difference between a solar calendar and a lunar calendar. The thing with the lunar calendar, if you follow lunar calendars such as the Jewish calendar or the Islamic calendar, they keep getting further and further and further away. So Ramadan happens now at all different times of the year, depending on that. You don't truly have 13 full moons within the year. It always extends over.
I see.
So with a solar calendar, welcome, come on in. With a solar calendar, you've basically got 365 and a quarter days
Or
taking
at least
place.
360, and then you have to
Right.
deal with those on.
And you deal with those
Thank you.
epigomenal days. Those
Where'd that word come
5.
from?
It's a Greek word, and I don't know. I could look it up for you.
Just curious.
Well, and then the solar calendar corresponds more precisely to the seasons too, right?
It
It's
does.
difficult to make the lunar calendar.
The lunar calendar is very hard. It's very hard to find a coincidence between the lunar and solar calendar, which is why when we look at these and talk about holidays, there are some holidays that are lunar, which we call movable feast, and there are holidays which are solar. Those are the fixed holidays. You know, I can speak more easily out of the tradition in which I was raised, which is Catholic Christianity, where you have fixed feast days, such as the Annunciation always takes place every year on March 25th, which used to be the spring equinox. The Feast of St. John the Baptist would take place on the 24th of June, the summer solstice. And then the Feast of St. Michael Archangel would take place, 3 months after that, though a little bit late. It happens on the 30th of September, so not quite exactly lined up to the autumnal equinox. And then Christmas, celebrating the birth of Christ, 9 months after the Annunciation, conveniently falls on December 25th. That's an explanation of a solar calendar, because...
And then Easter goes along with the movable.
Yes, Easter is a movable feast, and everything that is dependent upon Easter, which is Pentecost and Corpus Christi, as well as Ash Wednesday, the beginning of Lent, moves back and forth through the calendar year because of that.
But it's
So-
tied to the solar, isn't it?
Only in
first
that
full
it's the
moon
first
after the-
full moon, but it's a lunar feast, and that's why those feast days
Right.
change every year.
But it's tied
First full
to.
moon after the ingress of the sun into Aries.
Exactly,
Yes.
right.
Yeah.
So it's tied to that solar event.
So, these symbols are zodiac. The word zodiac means basically band of life, or we refer to it as band of animals. We're projected against the starry backdrop of the night skies along the line of the ecliptic, extending slightly north and south of the Earth's equator. So when we go to look to the zodiac, we go out and we look in that direction. We look to the south in order to see those constellations. So, the astrology we teach here, which is known as Hermetic astrology, has also in the past been called standard astrology. Though there are things that are unique to the Hermetic system, it pretty much uses standard astrology, which is tropical zodiac. And they are, standard astrology or Hermetic astrology are this mixture. It's an amalgam of the different systems that predated it. Primarily Chaldean, Egyptian, and Greek sources. They were codified 2,500 years ago into pretty much the system we use today, with a few, bells and whistles thrown in here and there. The zodiac we use, although based on the Babylonian or Chaldean zodiac, is primarily Greek. It was altered by the Greeks. So we're working with the stories and language out of Greek mythology. The Greeks had this ability to, any culture they went into, to just absorb from that and synthesize that alongside their own culture. So truly, the astrology we use today could be called Hellenistic astrology. Where did they get their symbols? Well, they were borrowed. Although there were things that were specific within Greek culture, they absorbed the mathematics, the astronomy, astrology, the philosophy of the different peoples that they came in contact with. They took the stargazing of the Chaldeans and the Egyptians, added geometry, philosophy, rational thought, and this is the astrology which we use today, which is known as horoscopic astrology. Prior to 2,500 years ago, the type of astrology that was being practiced is not the same as we practice today. It was less concerned about the fate of individual humans and more concerned about mundane world events, things as they would affect rulers and or kingdoms.
There's even hints of that in the Bible, isn't there? When astrologers were consulted and know when a king should go into battle or something like that. Are there biblical references to that?
Well,
I don't know my Bible that well, sorry.
No,
But
not exactly.
I know they consulted dreams
Correct.
in the Bible, and I thought that the birth of the Savior was not the only thing that was referenced as an astrologically omened, or portended event.
And King Solomon had a lot to do with the occult, but they don't put any of that in the Bible. They just put it as, he was just a good guy.
All right. Greek mathematical astrology began in the 4th century BC with Euclides and was powerfully influenced in the 3rd and 2nd centuries by Aristarchus and Hipparchus, who discovered the precession of the equinox. Ptolemy, an Alexandrian Greek of the mid-2nd century, was the author of 2 important astrological texts, the Almagest and the Tetrabiblios. Ptolemy said, "The astrologer should so understand the movements of heavenly bodies that he can know the place or time of any configuration." I am so glad for my laptop.
Isn't it the precession of the equinoxes?
What did I say? Recession?
Pro. Yeah, we could say recession. No, that says pro instead of pre.
Oh, that is a spelling.
Because it
Error.
goes backwards from
Yes.
Taurus back into Aries, back. Yeah,
Yeah.
okay. That's what's going to lead us back into the age of Aquarius. Or
If we aren't
has
there
done
already.
so. Yeah,
Yes,
right.
according to whomever you talk to.
Right.
So, this is a course on the Deacons, or Decanates, and the word deacon comes from the Greek word meaning 10. If you remember back at the beginning, the Egyptian weeks were not 7 days in length. They were 10. Curiously enough, during the French Revolution, for a period of time, they switched, the French were Egyptomanic, basically. And they went onto a decimal system weeks. It just didn't last. So we all follow the same calendar now. Now, by the end of the 2nd millennium, there were 48 constellations associated with the calendar system. This is in the writing of Ptolemy. You'll find it in earlier authors as well, such as Aretha of Soli. 12 signs of the zodiac and 36 deacons. Nowadays, I believe there are 88 standard constellations or recognized constellations. Many of those have been added in the last 400 years. But we work, in this class, we will be working with these 48 constellations, the constellations recognized by Ptolemy.
Christopher, I probably have a silly question, but
I'll entertain
now,
it.
why wouldn't we want to incorporate some of those constellations? Could it be because it's not the constellation's energy? It's not the constellation that projects energy, but it's what is this energy coming from?
You know, it's actually hard to know, and that's one of the conundrums in astrology. There are different schools out there, and primarily the biggest division is the sidereal astrologers, who actually believe that it's the constellations that hold the energy, and tropical astrologers that believe that there is a particular energy that is associated with each of the seasons and with the 12-fold division of the year, and that those energies were just at a particular time projected, much like this slide projector, out against the backdrop of the stars.
And so a story was created?
And a story was created from that. And that through the precession of the equinoxes, which is based on the wobbling of the Earth's axis, that changes about every 2,500 years. The equinoctial year moves backwards from one sign to the next. And these become the astrological ages. So we don't believe that every constellation out there really has an influence. And when we start studying the Deacons, they're very different than the Zodiac, because the Zodiac actually falls along the ecliptic, this boundary around the Earth's equator, which we are on the same plane that the other planets, which are revolving around the sun, are on. And that's where we see the planetary movement. What we'll discover when we look at the Deacons is that these are constellations that fall north and south of the equator. But they can be matched up with, or at one time, 2,500 years ago, they could be matched up with zodiacal longitude by being on the same axis, north or south of that zodiacal sign, which is how the stories were integrated. Deca means 10. Each sign, 30 degrees. Each decanate is 10 degrees. So each sign of the zodiac has a 10-degree subsection or subdivision. The way that the ancient Egyptians did this is there were these guys that worked the graveyard shift.
But nothing to do.
They were up at night looking at the heavens. There was no television or anything else to distract them, an occasional, campfire with stories around it. So basically, what was going on was everything in the night sky. And I can remember, there were a couple of years when I lived out in a teepee in the woods and could see everything with great clarity. And I remember the night living in Los Angeles of the Northridge earthquake, when all of the power in the city went out. And I looked up to the skies, and there weren't any lights in Southern California. And you could see the heavens in all of their glory without the light pollution. And it was really clear, how ancient humans were just fascinated by this drama going on in the sky. So what they did is they would be looking out at the eastern horizon for what were the last stars to be seen rising over the eastern ascendant before the sun came up. And so these became, each of these 10 degrees, they were looking north and south of the equator to see what constellations were there. And our Deacons actually come from this Egyptian system.
So the heliacal rising of the fixed stars would be what what stars were coming up just before the sun rose?
Yes.
The last things they could see before the light of day drowned out the...
Exactly.
Okay.
All right, decanates are referred to in two distinct ways, and we'll be touching on both of them in this class over the next few weeks. Most common method assigns to each 10-degree section of the zodiac a zodiacal sub-influence belonging to the same triplicity, meaning element, and planetary sub-influence. That is a mouthful. So unless you know what I'm talking about, basically in the following order, for example, a triplicity might be the fire signs. There's Aries, Leo, and Sagittarius. So in each of those signs, we'll start off with the Aries decanate, the Aries Leo decanate, the Aries Sagittarius decanate. When you switch to Leo, it's the Leo decanate, the Leo Sagittarius decanate, and then the Leo Aries decanate. So it follows in a succeeding order. Each sign, we know when we study astrology, has a ruling planet, or a planet considered to be at home. So for Aries, it would be Mars. For Leo, the Sun. For Sagittarius, Jupiter. And each of those planets becomes a sub-influence for that 10-degree section of the zodiac. All right. And here we just did it. First decanate of Aries is written in astrological shorthand as Aries. Mars is the ruling planet. There you have it. Second decanate is written as Aries Leo with the Sun, and the third decanate, Aries Sagittarius with Jupiter as the ruler. This is one way where we can, through astrological shorthand, pull in clues about these sub-influences in the zodiac. And this is what it looks like when it's spelled out in a wheel. We have 12 signs, and we have 36 decanates, each following in successive order. Now, just about every astrologer that works with Deacons will agree upon this particular order of things. Now, the stuff that really interests me is the stuff that has to do with mythology and folklore. And, my story about this is really the way I arrived at astrology was through a background in mythology. As a child, at age 8, my family moved. And they moved to an area that was within blocks walking of a library. So my life suddenly became liberated. I could walk to the library several times a week and get books. And the stuff I really loved to read was very fantastic stuff. It was the folklore and mythology, whether it was folk tales out of Africa, Native American folk tales, the classical mythology of Greek and Rome was a particular favorite, Celtic folk tales, and, Russian fairy tales and German fairy tales. I just voraciously devoured that material, which was, fantastic in its imagery and very deep in symbolism. And at the same time, I had a little golden book on astronomy that I would look at in terms of trying to understand all of the things that we've talked about previously. Well, I was probably 12 or 13 when it all clicked, where suddenly it made sense to me that all of these stories, these mythologies I had been reading about, were actually pictured in the heavens, and there was this interrelationship, and that started me down the path that I haven't really strayed very far from.
Yeah.
So, the decanate in Hermetic astrology is referred to the name of the corresponding constellation which hold symbolic mythological insights into the spiritual nature of the zodiac. Each of these decanates corresponds to a constellation commonly recognized by Aratus, Ptolemy, and other astrologers of the classic Greek period. Now, not all astrologers agree upon which constellations are syncretized to each of the 10-degree subsections of the zodiac. So there are problems there, but I do really like Zane's system. And we'll see over the next few weeks when we actually look at the temperament of people's charts. Each night we're going to look at 3 charts and do a biography to understand that person and how this one little influence in the chart can impact personality.
Christopher?
Yes.
Excuse my, what might have seemed like disrespect. It was meant as humor. But would you say that it's mostly Greek myths that got applied to the heavens,
Mm-hmm.
right? Would you say that it's the most popular or best known of the Greek myths that got immortalized? Or is there any
No.
explanation for... I mean, I remember as a child my mom read us Pegasus, and I just couldn't get enough of it. I would ask for Pegasus over and over and
Pegasus
over.
is included, but you might not recognize Bootes or Icarius or some of these other lesser-known stories.
And there might have been other favorite stories that really were left out.
Right. And the other thing you'll see when we start studying this is sometimes the constellations can represent more than one story, or more than one person might be represented by the constellation. And then if you start to study if you start to look into other traditions, you'll see that they have different stories too. Whether it's astrology of the Navajos, whether it's the astrology of the German tribes, African tribes, they all have different stories, though they tend to also identify the most prominent star clusters. I mean, there are certain things that just stand out in the heavens that
And
capture.
project people and animals.
Exactly. I mean, have you ever laid on your back and looked at clouds? Yeah. Does it really look like a sheep? No. But in your mind it does. And that's what ancient humans were doing, is they were projecting their stories. One way of telling their stories was to put it up in the night sky. You're sitting around at night telling stories because there's no TV to tell stories to you. And you'd point out, oh, and there you've got this, or there you've got that. And it would relate back to things that pertain to what we talked about before: birth, initiation, marriage, death. This is the substance of all of our lives. And all of us is here to survive our own life, which is unique and different than the person sitting next to you. Each one of us would tell a very different story.
But Zane made that great point that the stories that took for projections out into the heavens weren't vulnerable to changes of regime and political upheaval, and they somehow became more eternal than the vicissitudes on Earth.
Right. He creates a comparison in his writings on the fact that, of course, coming out of Egyptian culture, if you study that, try to find the word Hatshepsut in stone anywhere.
She was
Systematically
pharaoh.
eradicated.
Yeah.
The other person you might have a hard time finding is Akhenaten.
The
Because,
one God.
yes,
Uh-huh.
he was also eliminated
Right.
afterwards. So humans have this ability to try and completely erase the works of their predecessors. When
And religions supplant religions.
Exactly.
Yes.
If you go down into Mexico, if you go to the ruins in Mitla or Cholula or other places, you have Catholic temples which are built upon the pre-Columbian temples there. And so ancients pushed their stories out into the heavens where it's harder to, obliterate them. And interestingly enough, we still use these stories today. There was a period of time in the 17th century where it was decided by certain astronomers that we shouldn't be honoring the pagans and their traditions, and that we need to Christianize this. And, well, guess what the Zodiac became? The 12 apostles. And all of the other constellations drew upon stories from Old and New Testament.
Well, and still the fixed signs of the symbols of Taurus, Leo, Scorpio, and Aquarius are representative of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John in the Christian church. That one did stick.
Yeah, it was tidy. It fit in very well. All right. So, these are the Deacons, and these are the names of the corresponding constellations. So, this is astrological shorthand, and this is primarily English rendering of mostly Greek words. All right, and Zane says that in placing these symbolical pictographs of the influence of the 36 decanates of the Zodiac in the heavens, they used the same system as they did when they traced the pictures of the 12 signs. That is, the first ultra-zodiacal constellation pictured the first 10 degrees of the Zodiac, the second ultra-zodiacal constellation pictured the second 10 degrees, and so on. So ultra-zodiacal means the decanates because they fall outside of the zodiac. They are not, except for Ophiuchus and Serpens, most all of these other constellations are slightly on either side of the ecliptic.
Those two fall within it?
Yes.
That's why they want to make Ophiuchus the other.
The 13th sign,
right.
yes. All right, he goes on to say, because it is the best starting point, it is still so used by astronomers, both the timing and east and west positions of the stellar bodies being stated by them, as so far from the vernal equinox, or first point of Aries. They draw a line from the pole star directly south through the point on the equator where the sun crosses it. This line, called the prime meridian, cuts off the old year and the old circle of stars. It is 0 hours of sidereal time, 0 degrees of right ascension, and 0 degrees of zodiacal longitude, where it cuts the celestial equator. This is thus the point where and when a new cycle starts. To form 48 distinct pictures, both north and south of hemispheres of the heavens were used. To place pictures covering much of the two hemispheres on a single plane surface, in their true relationship to their distance from the commencement of the zodiac, causes pictures of one hemisphere greatly to overlap and obliterate the outlines of pictures of the other hemisphere. Hence, if the pictures of all 48 constellations are given on a single page, their true positions must be distorted. Somewhere in the earliest ages of human existence, the stars were named and arranged in groups by someone thoroughly familiar with the great facts of astronomy. Those names and groupings were at the same time included in certain figures, natural or imaginary, but intensely symbolic and significant. These names and figures have thence been perpetuated in all astronomy records of all the ages and nations since. They are founded on indisputable astronomic truths and hence form the groundwork of all maps and designations of celestial presentations, except for that brief period where the heavens were Christianized. And this comes not from Zane, but from an author writing in 1882, the year Zane was born. A wonderful book called The Gospel in the Stars, but an attempt to link the pagan constellations to stories from Old and New Testament. And Zane says, the objects sought by the ancients in these pictures, however, were not merely to portray the influences of a section of the zodiac over human life, but also to set forth the particular spiritual teaching which was equally related to the same zodiacal section. Each position in the sky that had an influence over human conduct to them implied that there should be a definite teaching which revealed how the individual could overcome the threatened danger, or how he could take the fullest advantage of the spiritual opportunity offered. That's why we do this. So, when you flatten it all out, that is the mess it becomes. These constellations are northern hemisphere, these southern. Excuse me. The Religion of the Stars constellation chart shows the positions of the signs of the zodiac along the ecliptic and the positions of the decanate constellations. Because some of the decanates fall below the equator, the celestial sphere has been flattened out to accommodate all 48 constellations.
So would this decanate system not work in the southern hemisphere of the Earth? Theoretically, should they have a different assignation of the 36 decanates?
Well, I'm sure Aboriginal astronomers do have different sets of stories that they tell. But it's still the same because of, again, the prime meridian. Every meridian that's drawn every 10 degrees is touching on a constellation north or south. It's just the birth of astrology took place between about 32 degrees north and 40 degrees north. In fact, most of the constellations described lead us to believe that it was probably in Crete that this was really developed. Okay, the first decanate of Aries. Aries, Mars is the sub-influence. The constellation is called Triangulum. You can see it here. All right. My angle is not very good, but I believe I see Andromeda over here. Just south of Andromeda, on the edge of the Milky Way, lies a small and faint constellation. There's the close-up.
Why are you saying it points downward?
Because there's... I think because they're using a northern-oriented focus. So it's pointing downward, meaning towards the south. All right, I like this. In 1590, Thomas Hood claimed that Triangulum was placed in the heavens so that the head of Aries could be identified. Yeah, it's a fairly, at least visually, insignificant constellation. Nevertheless, big in story. Also known as Delta, which is the Greek letter of the same shape. And it's actually believed that Triangulum, or Delta, was placed in the heavens to represent the fertile Nile Delta, which is also, that's where Delta comes from, the shape of the Nile Delta. German Dreieck, French Triangle, and Italian Triangolo. Another story holds that Ceres, the goddess of grain, begged Jupiter to immortalize her beloved Isle of Sicily, which bears the same shape. So Sicily used to be the breadbasket of the Roman world until 52 BC, they conquered Egypt. So, you can see the triangle shape in the island. To the Jews, Triangulum was called shalish, after a stringed instrument of the triangular shape. And Christian authors have associated this constellation with the Trinity, as well as St. Peter's mitre. This is a great series of images you'll see coming up in the classes. These come from a book known as the Latin Aretha, which was a book produced in the Carolingian Renaissance, 12th century, during the reign of Charlemagne, when during that period of time, prior to the Italian Renaissance, there was a resurgence in the interest in astrology, primarily to be able to set the dates of the movable feast. The Latin Aretha is named after Aretos of Soli. It's actually the treatise he wrote is called The Phenomena, because he's writing about all of these constellations and their relationship to worldly events, primarily weather patterns. All right, Zeus, or Deus, begins with the letter D. So some believe that's why it was chosen as the very first constellation. The triangle is also the alchemical symbol for fire. Now Zane says, Aries, first decanate. This is from Delineating the Horoscope. This is course 10-1. To picture the possibilities of the first decanate of the Zodiac, the masters of old traced in the sky a starry triangle. This constellation, Triangulum, symbolizes the divine fire that those born under the first decanate of Aries have the capacity to inhale. When living in their highest, they are true leaders in thought, for the triangle, ever used as a symbol of flame, is also used as a symbol of mind. And again, by its three sides united into one figure, it represents the union of body, mind, and spirit, thus teaching the importance of cooperation. The pioneer spirit of Aries is expressed in this decanate in all its fiery fullness. Zeal and enthusiasm mark the progress of its children. The Aries decanate of Aries, sub-ruled by the aggressive lord of war, ever seeks new worlds to conquer. And when the thoughts are permitted to soar untrammeled upwards, even as the triangle points to heaven, those born under this influence become the harbinger of better things. But when the lower martial power gains sway, they become the avenging agents of death and destruction. That's scary. He goes on to say, in spiritual astrology, those who are born from March 21st to March 31st, while the sun is in the decanate pictured by Triangulum, are distinguished for their activity. And the starry triangle itself sets forth in its own symbolical language the text. All life, thought, and action are the product of the union of positive and negative potencies. So, here's our chart example. let me pull up my biography. Who is she known as? She's a queen.
Yeah. Queen of Soul.
Queen of Soul. Aretha Franklin is an American singer, songwriter, and pianist. She was ranked by Rolling Stone magazine among the 100 greatest singers of all time. With 58 albums under her belt and countless sold-out performances, Franklin has won more Grammys, 15, than any other female performer in any category, and has topped the charts with 17 top 10 singles. Franklin was the first female artist to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. Aretha Louise Franklin is the third of 4 children, was born in a 2-room house in Memphis, Tennessee. During her childhood, her family moved from Memphis to Buffalo and then Detroit. Her mother died when she was 10 years old. She was raised by her grandmother. As a small child, Franklin sang in church while standing on a chair behind the podium. In her late preteens, Franklin was regularly singing solo numbers in her father's Baptist church. In September 1960, at age 18, she released her first single for Columbia. It reached number 10 on Billboard's R&B chart. Her first album was released in January 1961. At age 14, Aretha toured throughout the South with her father, and as a featured member of the New Bethel Choir. At age 14, she also gave birth to the first of 2 sons by 2 different men. To this day, she has never identified their fathers. In 1961, Franklin married Ted White and subsequently had a 3rd son with him. There were alleged rumors of abuse, and they divorced in 1969. In 1967, I Never Loved a Man made Franklin a superstar, but the following year, Respect earned her the first 2 of her Grammy Awards. Franklin remarried in 1978 to actor Glenn Thurman. In 1979, her father, Reverend C.L. Franklin, was shot in his home by 2 burglars. He survived but slipped into semi-coma for 5 years, passing away in 1984. Franklin moved back to Detroit in 1982 to be close to him. She published her autobiography, Aretha, From Those Roots, written with David Ritz in 1999. Aretha lost a $1.4 million house in Detroit to a devastating fire on October 25, 2002. This was just weeks after the death of her sister Irma. Since 1988, more than 30 lawsuits have been filed against her by creditors, totaling more than $1 million. In 2009, Franklin performed at Barack Obama's inauguration. So, Decanate of Activity. That's the key word for this Triangulum constellation. Her sun falls in this first degree of Aries, or in this first Decanate of Aries, in the 5th house. What are 5th house matters?
Creativity.
Entertainment, affairs.
Yes, affairs, entertainment, children, creativity. So, you know, she has been a trailblazer.
Gambling.
And gambling.
She had all those creditors after her.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
She just almost got married again.
Did she?
Yeah, she didn't, but I mean, she was gonna.
There were rumors she had pancreatic cancer. She was really ill in the last
Yes.
couple of years.
She missed some performances because of that. So that continues to be the rumor.
But then she appeared looking really good.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think she's amazing. And speaking of looking really good, I try to find quotes by these people that match up with something related to the constellation, and I couldn't quite with Aretha, but I did like this quote. I'm a big woman, I need big hair. Now, tell me if this doesn't look like a triangle, you know?
Like a bell.
Maybe a bell, yeah. Oh, I think you're right.
The hat she wore at
at the inauguration.
Was a triangle.
So you think that her son being in that first decanate marks her life with a lot of activity?
Yes. Incredible amount of activity. And if we were to look back at that, oh, where is it? All life, thought, and action are the product of the union of positive and negative potencies. And truly, when you listen to her music, I mean, she is singing the blues. And you don't, I mean, we think of her music as something that's really positive and beautiful and creative, but it comes out of something else. You know, it comes out of these very deep, intense life experiences. But I also think, you know, she's somebody that really, she doesn't spend her time talking about, you know, the losses, the negativity, the scandals, or any of that. I mean, this is somebody who tends to stay fairly, you know, positive and on top of things and focused in on her music.
Yeah, someone else might have just been beaten down by all of
By
those.
those life experiences,
Giving
yeah.
birth at 14.
Mm-hmm.
Jeez.
And never divulging the identity of the fathers. That's an interesting, that shows her independence and her, you know, maybe a
Yeah.
form of RESPECT.
Right. Maybe nobody's business.
Right.
So everybody would love to know.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So she was like she's very strong in her mind.
Mm-hmm. Right, and I mean, the song Respect is definitely suits this chart.
And it was so of its time. You know, it was a flagship song for its era.
Right, and for civil rights as
Yeah,
well.
Right.
Right.
And the 60s. What was the year of Respect?
I think 67.
Because that
That would
whole,
be about right.
you know, the whole free love and flower children and, you know, all that revolution was going on then. And women's rights.
Mm-hmm. All right, we're going to move along, only to be able to make it through class on time. All right, flowing from the left foot of Orion is the source of a river that Aretha titled Eridanus, the River of Life. It is also said to spill out from the urn held by Aquarius. You can see
She is neat. Or no, that's the left.
Capricorn touches this, or that may be Cetus. I can't really see from here.
Lupus is right under the
See, that's Cetus. You mean at the very top?
Yeah, Lepus is right at the foot of Orion.
And then Taurus is to the immediate right.
Now, Artus titled this Eridanus. Other authors refer to it as the Nile. Why? It's the only river that flows from south to north. And that was so known in the ancient world. Now, Eridanus has been identified as the Po River in Italy, and that is associated with different mythologies.
Does that flow north?
No, it flows, the Po flows from west to east.
I think there's a river in Alaska that flows to the north, too.
Does it?
I heard that just recently.
Our own Mojave River in California goes north. It ended in Death Valley.
Oh, it ends in Death Valley? Okay.
That's a pretty picture, Christopher.
This is from a palace in Milan, for which my aging memory is failing on the name of this palace.
One of those on the ceiling?
Yes, this is a mural on the ceiling. One of the great rooms in this palace is just painted with all of the 48 constellations. Why can't I remember the name of the palace? Is it Farnese? It might be the Farnese. Maybe not. All right. Here you can see Apollo's horses and his son Phaeton. We'll talk about this story again in a few weeks. Or no, we won't. You'll have to go online to hear about it. But there is the story about Apollo's son Phaeton, who kept bugging his dad to get the keys to the car. You know, he didn't have a driver's permit, but he wanted to get out and drive. And finally, his dad got so tired of hearing about it that one day he just let him take the chariot out, and it was disastrous. In areas he flew too high, and the earth froze over. Other areas he flew too close, and the earth scorched to desert. People's skin became burned. Pretty much everyone had it, and they petitioned Zeus, who dislodged him with a thunderbolt, and he fell into the river Eridanus.
And died?
Yeah, never to be heard from again. That story didn't have a happy ending, except for the people of Earth,
Who were no longer scorching.
we are no longer scorching or freezing.
Is he flying again?
Yeah, I think he's got the reins again with this climate change. The river flows from Orion's foot to where the great beast Cetus lay lapping at its shores, and on to Canopus, the star that touches Argo's steering oar. So these are the constellations that are touched by this river. Now, Canopus, named after an island in the Nile Delta, was the southernmost visible star and called it Perigaios, or nearest to the earth. So that's sort of where the river ends, in the constellation of Argo Navis.
And that rules one of the decanates in Taurus, right? The
On
last.
Cancer,
Oh,
Argo. Last decanate of Cancer. Now, for the ancient Greeks, this world was separated from the next by the river Styx, where Charon, the ferryman, would transport souls to the realm of the dead. When the Greeks, when somebody died, they would put a coin in their mouth. Why? They didn't have pockets. And you had to pay. You had to pay the ferryman. So he wouldn't take you to the next world without, a tariff. Now, in Egypt, upon death, the solar barge would ferry souls to be judged by Osiris. The River Jordan, or boundary to the Promised Land, also represents the etheric boundary line, which separates the inner plane from the outer plane, and is so impacted by the state of our emotions. The river represents water. Curious that it's in a fire sign, though. Oh, that last picture was from Gustave Doré. It's Moses looking down into the Holy Land, not able to cross the River Jordan. Zane says, Aries' second decanate. The second decanate of Aries is pictured in the skies by Eridanus, the river of life, flowing from the never-failing fountain of perpetual youth. Here we find the severity of Mars, tempered by the magnanimity of the sun. Say that 10 times fast, someone. Magnanimity. Which has sub-rulership over this decanate. It is the Leo section of Aries, and as Leo is natural ruler of the house of love, so the water, symbol of the emotions, bespeaks the affectional influence. Only through the affections, only in the sacred precincts of love, does man quaff the coveted elixir that imparts eternal life. He corresponds, this river, to the fountain of youth, being the elixir of life or elixir of love. So, those born under this section of the sky may well seek this most hallowed source of power. They become rulers of men through their inherent powers to sway the minds of others. They are born to lead rather than to serve, for this sub-influence of Leo lends a persistent ambition for power. The heart is somewhat joined to the head, and the more this union is cultivated, the better. For the greatest lever for attainment, obtainable by the natives of this decanate, is noble affection. The key word of the decanate is exaltation, and it would be difficult to find a symbol which so clearly indicates the means to attain this end as does the celestial river, Eridanus. To those who read in its purport, sets forth this text: the fountain of immortal life springs from man's emotional nature, the vibrations of exalted love having a rate sufficiently frequent to affect spiritual substance and build a spiritual body. All right. One of my favorite Aries, Doris Chase Doane. You can see the sun, 13 Aries, falls in this middle decanate, Eridanus. Let's see, do I have a bio for her? Doris Louise Chase was born to Willis E. Chase and Rose Chase Bolac on April 4th, 1913 at 1:57 a.m. in Mansfield, Massachusetts. Doris' chart, along with the timeline and brief biographical data, can be found in Course 17, Cosmic Alchemy. With Jupiter as her most prominent planet, she expressed an effervescent personality, overflowing with goodwill, cheerfulness, and optimism. As her sister Emma once described her, Doris was born happy. She is one of those people who is always positive. Doris's early years were shaped by her family, her love of reading, and the natural beauty of her native Massachusetts. Her photo albums of her early life were filled with images of her frolicking with her friends at the seashore. Doris graduated from Mansfield High School in 1931 and immediately went on to study at Wilford Beauty Academy, from which she graduated in 1932. After a brief stint as a hairdresser, she decided in 1933 to enter nurses training. Both areas of professional development contributed to her people skills and helped shape her for her later work as an astrological consultant. 1938 was to be a pivotal year in Doris's life. Her brief marriage to Mr. Andrews ended in divorce. She also had some vivid psychic experiences, which prompted her to dedicate her life to humanity. Although she would always treasure the Bible given to her by her mother in 1926, she commenced her investigations into other philosophical systems as she shopped for truth. She set out for Los Angeles to pursue opportunities for personal growth, and in 1939 she began work in the extensive astrological and metaphysical library that had been amassed by Philosophical Research Society under the guidance of Manly Palmer Hall. Doris joined the Church of Light in 1941 and began working there the following year. After 4 years of concentrated study, Doris became a hermetician. In 1943, she began her studies at UCLA majoring in psychology and sociology. It was here that she discovered her desire to write. And it was also around this time that she met Edward Doane. Although almost 20 years her senior, this was to be the love of her life. Doris and Ed married in 1944. She returned to work for the Church of Light, and together with Doris, Ed became a driving force in the organization. Through their services, teaching, conducting research, grading exams, processing orders, and overseeing the printing of the lessons. They provided support at headquarters, which allowed Albert Benjamin to tour the country in the post-war era, promoting the Brotherhood of Light through his crusade talks. It was in April 1951, while visiting Lake Charles, Louisiana, that Albert Benjamin received the following message from the Inner Plane Brotherhood. It is the life work of Doris Chase Doane to present the general public in popular and entertaining style the outstanding teachings set forth in the Brotherhood of Light lessons through many periodicals, and thus get publicity for the Church of Light, and to see that a wide public understand its principal teachings. Albert shared this information with Doris in August of that year, and her life's mission was clear from that point forward. Albert passed away 3 months later, on November 18, 1951, confident that he was leaving his beloved church in good hands. So, she wrote a lot of books.
Did he know he was going to die soon when he had that experience? When that information came to him psychically?
I don't know. He left that note. He didn't leave anything else, and I have not talked to anyone who had any anecdotal information. Here's a great quote by Doris, which I think relates to this deaconate. Humanity, come on, speak to us, Doris. Humanity has an unfolding role of special significance in the universe. It is not merely a disconnected intelligence. Astrology provides valuable connections that the therapist can link in a program to assist in bringing usefulness, peace, spirituality, and happiness to mankind. All right, we're getting down to the...
So the key word for that decadent is...
Exaltation. Thank you.
So she exalted her, so how would we apply that?
Well, her consciousness was an
exalted.
example of exaltation.
I have to agree. And my experience with Doris is Doris suffered a lot of onslaughts at the hands of other people in her life. And I actually never heard Doris talk negatively about anyone. There were 2 people that she made comments about to me, but in the most general way. I mean, the most negative thing I ever heard from Doris in talking about a mutual colleague of ours, she said, yes, I know she studied all of the lessons. It's too bad she hasn't applied them.
There's a certain magnanimity even in that.
Yes. Gave her the benefit of the doubt. So, now, she always did her best to speak really positively about others and to not focus on the past and not focus her attention on any of the injustices that had been shown to her throughout her life.
But looking at her chart, it's sort of surprising that this is a person who took such a leadership role in the world.
Because it's all...
Yeah, under the horizon.
Most everything falls below the horizon.
Quite an introvert.
But look at her
Except for
Mercury,
Jupiter.
which is the writing planet, and the Sun. It's pioneering. It's leadership. Wouldn't you think?
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Aries is.
But she could have been a financial analyst too.
Oh.
You know, to apply her energies to, you know, seemingly ninth house material or something. I don't know. It's just sort of.
Well, look at that Uranus.
interesting.
Her Uranus is in Aquarius, right there in that first house.
Right.
But this is probably the
So
most powerful
humanitarian.
aspect in the chart, is the Neptune opposing the ascendant. It's within 1 degree. And no doubt she had very powerful intuitive experiences that always look to your most powerful aspect in your chart. It will tell the story of your life. It will, because it is around that you make your choices and decisions. And in this case, I think what she experienced may have been such a visceral experience that although one might expect great, you know, riches or emphasis on finance in her chart, she wrote lots of books and supported herself from writing astrology books. But few people make lots of money off of writing astrology. There's not that great of a market for it. You know, Sidney Omar may have been the only one out there making money, and maybe Linda Good.
Alan Leo.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's been a few, but.
But how many books do they really sell? So.
Right.
But
that quote that you cited really interests me because she saw the role of humanity on a cosmic level, and that to her was why she found astrology useful. Now that's a really exalted consciousness. That's a really elevated vision. It's just neat that she could sort of overcome her own introverted tendencies to, you know, represent this great teaching.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I hadn't thought of that.
yeah, she worked at the Church of Light from 1942 until 1968. Then she went to work for the American Federation of Astrologers and represented them as their president for probably 3 decades.
Oh my God.
Yes.
When you said that Jupiter was her most, I forget the word, predominant planet, is that because the power of it by Astrodyne, or you said something about Jupiter being the strongest thing in her chart?
It is 12.2 Astrodyne, or 12.2% of her power is Jupiter, and Jupiter forms significant aspects. Jupiter squares the Sun, sextiles the Moon, trines Venus, semi-squares Mars. It forms a sesqui square to Saturn, an opposition to Neptune, sextile to the midheaven, and a conjunction to the ascendant.
Doesn't leave anything out.
Just a
Wow.
few things. So it's an active force in her chart. And of course, without the Astrodynes, we might look and just see, you know, Jupiter's in a
12th house.
12th house, in
Yeah.
a Caden house.
Uh-huh.
But she used that in her personality of being buoyant, upbeat, goodwill, always trying to find something positive to say about something.
Turning hell into heaven.
I mean, I remember, and making humor out of everything. I remember probably the first time I met her, we were in a hotel suite, and we were attempting to pass one another. And you know how you do that when you both step one way and then the next? And her first statement to me, which I use all the time now, is, "Shall we dance?"
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah.
So that's Jupiter. All right.
You're lucky you got to know her.
Yeah, she was good. A good influence. That's a great image, also from the Latin Aretha. This is the constellation of Perseus. Is he showing his butt? I think he
Yes,
is.
he is.
He sure is.
It's a
On a
fine
butt.
butt, too.
You hardly even notice the head that he's holding.
You can't get
All right. We'll
That's
refocus.
Medusa.
Don't stare at her too long.
Right.
Could be problematic.
Maybe that butt is saving us.
It is. All right, directly north of Taurus and between Andromeda, to the east should be and Auriga, Andromeda to the east and Auriga to the west is the great hero Perseus. Another naked person. All right, there's a reason for this. Perseus was fathered by Zeus when he appeared to Danae in the form of golden rain. Acrisius, Perseus's grandfather, received a prophecy that his grandson would kill him and set Danae and her son adrift at sea. There's a nice guy for you. He wears the wings. He does have something on. The winged sandals of Hermes. Carries a sword. We don't see the shield in this picture. And the severed head of the Gorgon Medusa. He also is wearing the helmet of invisibility.
Maybe that's the shield over his shoulder.
Oh, there.
Yeah.
Could be.
That's what I was thinking.
Scary. The Gorgon Medusa was a creature whose glare was so powerful that anyone who looked upon, that should be her, but I gave you an extra E, was turned to stone. The Gorgon's head is represented by the fixed star Algol, meaning demon's head. So, those astrologers that work with fixed stars associate Algol and any planets that are within its realm to be, I think it's the 29th degree of, I think now it's 29 degrees of Taurus with the precession of the equinox as a particularly unfavorable spot. Ah, what's that? Yes. Athena, aka Minerva, furnished Perseus with her shield, the surface of which was highly reflective. Does anyone know what her shield is called? The Aegis. So whenever we say somebody is under the aegis of something, we're talking about the shield of Athena. They're under their
Is that
protection.
protection?
Yeah. Hades or Pluto provided Perseus with his helmet of invisibility. Sorry, guys. Yeah, no happy ending. After accidentally killing Acrisius, well, he was right. Perseus pined away from grief. His father Zeus took pity on him and had him immortalized among the stars. I guess that's a happy ending.
Did he run off with Danae and put her adrift on a ship? Wasn't that the second part of the prophecy?
That was done when he was an
He
infant.
was, yeah.
Oh,
He was cast out because of the prophecy,
Yeah.
I see.
That was the beginning of the story.
but he got him anyway.
So, and that's there were a lot of adventures that happened between being cast to sea and pining away from grief. As
Well,
you
he
can
was
imagine,
a
in the life
hero.
of a hero,
Yeah.
many things happened.
And he was one of the students of Chiron.
Definitely. So, but that's the abbreviated form for time. You can all watch one of Laura's favorite movies, which is
Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief.
a great
About
story.
Perseus, that's what Percy stands for. And you can see Uma Thurman as
The
Medusa.
Gorgon.
And my favorite, what's the hunt's name? Who played 007?
Pierce Brosnan.
Pierce Brosnan as Chiron.
Yeah.
Unforgettable.
Yeah.
What's it called?
Percy Jackson and the Lightning Thief. And that's even a shortening of the title, but that'll get you there on Netflix.
It's a pretty cute film.
It was very good. I liked it. I saw it twice.
With the wings of thought on his feet, the helmet of courage on his head, armed with the sword of righteousness, protected by the shield of beneficence, and holding the blood-dripping head of Medusa in one hand, pictures the third decanate of Aries. That is a great sentence, I think. The sub-rulership of Jupiter diverts the aggressive energy somewhat into religious and philosophical channels. Consequently, this Sagittarius division of Aries has vast spiritual possibilities when its natives espouse some progressive line of thought or use their restless, never-failing energy in protection of the weak. Gets better. Perseus gained renown through his daring exploits in relieving oppression, and even as he severed the head of the Gorgon Medusa, which turned to stone all who gazed upon it, so the people of this decanate have the power to destroy the crystallizing influence of licentiousness, and like the David's version of the same tradition, cut off the head of the Goliath of selfish greed. They may become the valiant heroes who wage a successful fight against the sordid conditions that oppress civilized life. In the philosophical field of endeavor, they find a useful work in releasing Andromeda, the human soul, which all too often is found chained to the rock of materialism to be devoured by lust and envy. Scary thought. One of the hero stories is he released Andromeda from her chains.
And in the movie, he married her.
But he still pined away from grief. So. Except not in the
That
movie.
part, did they?
The exploits of Perseus, each in symbolical language, conveys an important message. But most important of all, he accomplished the work himself. The leading text thus portrayed, therefore, is, there is no vicarious atonement. Each soul is a responsible being, working out its own deliverance from the thraldom inherited from ancestry and forced upon it by environment. I just love that.
Wow.
Now, the person I chose for this decanate is very controversial. People either love her or hate her. And like the rest of us, she's a human being with a very mixed story. Madalyn Murray O'Hare. Does anyone know who she is?
Yeah, the atheist, she was she was
Is she
a
a communist?
figure, an atheist, and I don't know, a communist.
Anarchist.
An anarchist. There, that's probably a better word.
Different than communists because they actually believe in government. American atheist, activist, and author, O'Hare earned herself the title of the most hated woman in America by successfully waging a war against prayer in public schools, finally having it outlawed by Supreme Court hearings in 1963. She is the author of several books, including All About Atheist, Atheist Epic, Atheist Heroes and Heroines, Our Constitution the Way It Was, and What on Earth is an Atheist? O'Hare was the daughter of Lena and John Mays. Her dad was a successful owner-operator of a small construction business that did not survive the crash of 1929. When her seamstress mom, Lena, became pregnant with Madalyn, she threw herself out of the second-story window of their home in an attempt to abort pregnancy. O'Hare, eloping with John Roth at age 22, Soon after the bombing of Pearl Harbor, her husband was stationed in Hawaii, where he was stationed as a Marine. She entered the Women's Army Corps, joining in Hawaii. While in Hawaii, O'Hare fell in love with married Army officer William J. Murray, Jr. She found herself pregnant by Murray several months later. He refused to admit paternity, claiming the Catholic Church Where's the rest of my story? Hold on, you guys, while I find. Would never allow him to divorce his wife. Enraged, O'Hare sued for child support and took his name for herself and her son. During a thunderstorm, this is very Perseus, Murray challenged God that if such a thing as God existed, it should strike both her and her child dead with a bolt of lightning. When she and her
mother had, it's very similar to her mother trying to kill herself and her unborn child. Wow.
What was the thraldom of ancestry?
Yeah.
All right,
Come on.
there it is. Oh, you.
Oops. There is no vicarious atonement.
And the irony of the word deliverance. Working out its own deliverance.
From the thraldom inherited from ancestry enforced upon us by environment.
Wow.
No, I just,
Awesome.
as controversial as she is, she so represents this hero.
Yeah.
Although a very flawed hero in some ways.
Who's not?
What a brave
Right.
one, too.
Yeah. So, when she and her son survived unscathed, she determined that she had proved irrefutably that God does not exist. So, Murray moved to Texas, where she attended the South Texas College of Law and worked at a series of jobs to support herself and her son. She earned her BA in 1948 and passed the bar in 1953, though some reports state that it is unclear whether or not she was ever admitted to the bar. In 1952, she moved with her parents to Baltimore and had another son out of wedlock in 1954. Murray worked as a social worker for 15 years. In 1960, while dropping her son off at school, she observed his classmates reciting the Lord's Prayer. Murray's 3-year protest resulted in Supreme Court hearings which outlawed prayer in public schools. She became a nationally hated public figure. Her life was frequently threatened, her children beaten, her property and finances systematically destroyed. She moved to Austin, Texas, and married local artist Richard Franklin O'Hare in 1965. With his financial support, she established the American Atheist Center and the Society of Separationists, an organization devoted to the separation of church and state. Her marriage to Frank O'Hare ended with his death in 1978. By 1988, O'Hare had created as many 12 organizations and was laundering millions of dollars among them. By the early 90s, how's this for nonprofit? Pluto and Jupiter in the second house.
Say more.
Well, this is her way of making money. Actually came about through creating nonprofits. Pluto rules corporations, groups, organizations. Normally, Jupiter represents belief systems or faiths. In this case, it's an anti-belief system organization,
But
which
it's
is
still
in
a
of
belief
itself a
system.
belief system.
Right,
Yes.
exactly.
I didn't realize Pluto ruled corporations.
Corporation.
I thought that would be Saturn, institutions and stuff like that. Okay. Because they're so huge?
It's the corporate body.
It's
They're
different
comprised
parts
of
that-
many parts.
yeah,
Corporations
different parts
are.
having to come together and
Whether they're
cooperate.
for-profit or not-for-profit.
Okay, thank you.
All right. By 1988, okay, we went on through that. On 8/28/1995, O'Hare taped a message outside Atheist headquarters stating that all employees were officially laid off, and O'Hare, her son, and granddaughter were going on an extended vacation. They vanished. 12th house. Vanished. With $500,000 in gold coins. It was believed by the IRS and her oldest son that the trio met with foul play and were murdered. In 2001, investigators unearthed the bones of dismembered body parts at a ranch, Cape Wood, Texas, that were later confirmed to be those of O'Hare, her son John Garth Murray, and her adopted granddaughter Robin Murray O'Hare. A former office manager for O'Hare, David Roland Waters, led authorities to the grave site. Employees?
It was the employees that did it.
Employees, Libra, Venus, 12th house. So, if we think of Perseus as being the great hero fighting against all odds, she was fighting for what I think is a very noble cause, separation of church and state. And I'm a religionist. I'm a theist and not an atheist. And I believe strongly in that separation.
She fought against one of the greatest dragons.
She did.
You know,
Religion.
to this day, the most prejudiced against people in this country are atheists.
Really?
Yeah.
There's
heard-
more prejudice
If you
directed
take
towards
polls,
them.
yeah, they are the least accepted in society.
Wow.
And yet
Yeah.
their numbers are growing.
I hope
In a
so.
big
Yeah, I
way.
hope so.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that famous atheist just died,
Oh, yeah.
Chittister?
The Brit.
Yeah, British, real articulate, funny,
Yeah,
and but he too had row to hoe with his
Oh, yeah.
life's work for atheism. But they're really interesting thinkers. Can't knock them.
Can't we all get along?
Yeah, right.
Who famously said that?
Yeah, wasn't an atheist, I don't think. But, anyways, here's a great quote from O'Hare. An atheist believes that a hospital should be built instead of a church. An atheist believes that the deed must be done instead of prayer said. An atheist strives for involvement in life and not escape into death. He wants disease conquered, poverty vanished, war eliminated. Doesn't seem like
I must
Like
be an
noble
atheist.
Yeah.
And she walked her talk as a social worker for
Yes,
decades.
she did. She just became a little
Oh,
corrupted
yes.
over time,
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
you know.
Probably because she was so hated. I mean, she, the Ku Klux Klan could have strung her up. Except that all society would have been like the Klan against her.
She was very brave,
Yeah.
extremely. Perfect example of Perseus.
Yeah. Interesting, huh?
Mm-hmm.
So, that's our first class on the Deacanates. Any thoughts on this?
Well, it's sort of interesting that, the accidental killing of one's grandfather that Perseus did sort of is analogous to her corruptibility after all.
Yeah.
Because she clearly had a highly morally motivated life.
Or she was in rebellion, one or the other.
Well, yes, in part.
Probably
I mean, in
both.
part
Who
it was,
was all
what
of
do they
that?
say? There's the saying about, I can't even remember how it goes, of the woman spurned.
Oh,
Yeah.
A man knows no scorn like a woman. Scorned. No.
Spurn.
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 A man knows no scorn like a
The
woman.
wrath of a
Or
scorned
no
woman.
fury.
No,
Like
hell has no fury like
a woman
yeah, something.
burned. So I forget what the quote is, but that was part of it. You know, her rebellion also was against church because this man that she really loved would not, you know, agree to.
Admit the fathering her child.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So no doubt it stemmed from there. It's eerie that her mother would have thrown herself out the window. You know,
Yeah.
did she know her daughter would be the most reviled woman in America?
And it's eerie to how, like in Aries, her own proof of the non-existence of God was entirely personal and
Right.
subjective.
Yeah, exactly.
It's all about me.
Yes, my truth is
Yeah.
for all.
Yeah.
But she did. She did fight a great battle against a great monster and succeeded. Her story also did not have a happy ending. And interestingly enough, her subsequent generations were taken down with her. Now, this whole thraldom of ancestry that's in that. So I love the Decanates. I love their keywords. I love the spiritual text for each of the Decanates. To me, the material of myth is the most powerful stuff we have to talk about. And when we get in and start talking about our charts, we have to describe them in these highly symbolic ways. And what we're doing in this course, we are just looking at one factor. We're going the simplest route, which is just looking at the decanate where the sun falls. This is the ego, the self-esteem, the identity, the individuality to some degree is tied up in the sun. And so we can see these powerful messages that are carried down. I like to call the astrological chart our spiritual DNA.
Do you associate the sun with life purpose as well?
I do, because it's your most deep-seated identity.
And the significance of
It's where you
energy,
grow in
your
your
life
sense of
force.
significance, but it's also, you know, Joseph Campbell is known for saying something to this is a paraphrase, something to the effect that, you know, I don't believe that people are looking for the meaning of life, but they're looking for the feeling of being alive. And so the sun is where we draw in that sense that we're alive. And so these stories tell so much about what makes us tick or what makes us feel so much more alive.
But then she's got a lot of energy because of Aries in the decanate of Aries
Mm-hmm.
by
But there's-
Mars, ruled by Mars. I mean, and I noticed the other one too. You kind of picked that one too, where they had like a cluster of it that goes more into the decadent of that type. Is that what you're doing? You're trying to.
No, I'm actually, in selecting the charts, one of the reasons it takes so long to make these classes is it's not only doing my research on the mythology and folklore and the astronomy and the stuff from Zane I can pull most easily out of the books. The other stuff I have to really search for. But then I'm looking at a good dozen charts of people who fall under these categories, looking for a really insightful match, and also finding, you know, where I can get a good quote that represents that. Something that person actually said that is so revealing, other than maybe big hair. But
I know that works too.
yeah, it worked for me too.
Aries,
You
yeah.
gotta have a crown
Yeah.
You
if
do.
you're the queen of soul.
And Aries.
Well,
Aries
plus-
rules the head.
Plus, and that statement, you know, that the only reason Triangulum was placed in the heavens was to point to where Aries' head is. You know, it's all on the head. So that's sort of the process I'm doing, Erica. I'm looking just to find that one energy, but where I can match up the story of their life, something that the person may have actually said, and that good bio to go with the spiritual text. All right, so watch the next 3 online. Go to www.Church of Light TV, log on to Deacanates, watch them there, and we will start up next week with Leo.
Do we get any handouts, or do we have to print them out?
You can print them out there.
Yeah, they're right available next to the video. So I don't have them printed out here. If you're not able to print them out, let me know, or come in early. If you come in early next week to meet with us for dinner beforehand, just let me know and I'll print them out then for you.
Okay, because I would have to probably do it.
And that may not be good.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, well, we can-
there's a good chance I won't remember
Unless
to
it
next
is
week,
not me.
but come early and remind me and I'll do that for you. Any questions, any comments? Anyone online with a question or comment, Barb?
You have 8 people signed in.
All right. Well, greetings, all of you. Thank you for joining us. It only gets more fun from here on out. So see you same time, same place.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
What a carrot. Actually, all those areas were carrots.
Yeah, they were bigger than life.
Yeah, these people are.
Yeah, they live on. They live on. That's why, for me, the last stage in that process is death and remembrance, because we do live on, and through our works or how others remember us.
Well, you know, her work, as a child, how old? I wasn't that old whenever. I remember that transition from saying the Lord's Prayer to all of a sudden it wasn't okay. I felt protected by that. That emphasis on separation between church and state.
Right, and I didn't, because I grew up in a different environment, was raised in parochial education,
Yeah,
where
that was-
the only thing I knew about the name Madalyn Murray O'Hare is that she was an
It's been a long time, yeah. because-
atheist that was taking prayer out of school. And, well, it didn't take
Well,
prayer out of our
they're still
school
talking
because
about
we
it,
still went
yeah.
to Mass every morning, so.
Right.